He never raised his voice. He never had to. For 2 years, he sat at the same booth, ordered the same black coffee, and folded his paper the same way. To most, Raymond Clay was just another old man in a small Nebraska diner. But on the day danger walked through that door and laid its hand on a frightened girl, Raymond didn't shout. He tapped, and that quiet signal, barely a sound, stirred ghosts from across the country, men with faded tattoos and decades-old promises. What followed wasn't violence. It was precision, loyalty, and a silent reckoning only a brotherhood of forgotten protectors could deliver. Because some codes don't die with time. Some soldiers never stop serving, and sometimes the strongest voice in the room, though, doesn't speak at all. "You don't scare me, old man." The words cut through the hum of conversation like a switchblade, sharp and deliberate. The gang leader had spoken just loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. It was a challenge, soaked in arrogance, tossed across the room like a lit match. The effect was instant. Forks stopped midair. A spoon clinked to the floor. The waitress, already mid-pour, froze. Hot coffee trembling inside the glass pot like it knew what was coming. The air grew heavy, brittle with anticipation. But the old man didn't lift his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. He simply raised his hand, knuckles weathered and worn, and tapped the table 3 times, a pause. Then 2 more, tap, 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 tap. Nobody understood what it meant. Not then, but it wasn't for them to understand. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow, unhurried sip, calm and steady, like a man waiting for a storm he'd already seen coming. Outside the boundaries of town, black SUVs cruised onto the open highway, slicing through the morning haze like silent sentinels answering a call. Inside each vehicle sat a man who hadn't worn a uniform in years. Not officially, anyway, but they still carried themselves with the sharpness of soldiers, shoulders square, eyes scanning, instincts honed. On their forearms, beneath rolled-up sleeves and sun-aged skin, the same tattoo inked years ago. Foxtrot 6. They didn't call ahead, didn't ask for details. When they arrived at the diner, they spoke just one line. "Where's the problem?" Every morning at exactly 6:30, the bell above the entrance at Helen's place jingled with the same soft chime, and Raymond Clay stepped through the door, steady, quiet, and never a second late. He never rushed, never changed his order. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, always the same corner booth by the window on the far left side. No one had ever claimed it for him, but everyone knew it was his. That booth belonged to Raymond Clay in the way the sunrise belonged to morning. He was 76 years old and lived alone in a modest house just 2 blocks from the railroad tracks. The home was quiet, filled with tools that hadn't seen use in years and books whose spines were worn smooth from time and touch. For more than 40 years, Raymond had served as a railroad coordinator, a role that demanded absolute precision and the mental discipline of a chess master. Every switch, every signal, every train, he had directed with unshakable calm. Those habits never left him. Even in retirement, his movements remained measured, deliberate, his gaze sharp as ever. Most people didn't know that about him. Actually, most people in Maple Ridge didn't know much about Raymond Clay at all. To them, he was just Ray, the quiet man in the denim jacket and flat cap. He wore the same scuffed boots every day. Boots that whispered of long walks and longer years. Tucked under one arm was always a folded newspaper, usually the Maple Ridge Tribune, though on good days he managed to track down the Omaha World Herald. He read slowly, savoring each article, flipping the pages with the careful precision of someone who respected time. He never skipped the obituaries. Not once. His coffee sat perfectly centered on the napkin. No cream, no sugar, just black. Every time. He didn't talk much, but he always said thank you. Always. Lena knew that better than anyone. She was a junior at the local community college, working early shifts at Helen's place to pay her way through an education degree. She'd been there almost 2 years. And since her very first morning on the job, Raymond Clay had been coming in, never missing a day, never changing a beat. Their conversations were brief. A soft, "Good morning, sir," from her, a quiet thank you, ma'am, from him. But in that small exchange was something deeper, a quiet form of respect, almost protective. He called her ma'am, though she was young enough to be his granddaughter. And she, in return, made sure his table was wiped down twice, and that his coffee cup never ran dry. To outsiders, Raymond might have seemed like a relic, some faded photograph of a bygone era. But to those who really watched, who paid attention, there was a stillness about him that wasn't born from age. It was born from control. His silence wasn't absence. It was presence. Heavy, composed, unmistakable. Nobody had ever seen him rush. Nobody had ever seen him flustered. And nobody, at least not yet, truly knew who Raymond Clay was. Maple Ridge was the kind of town where time moved gently. Tucked between rolling cornfields and long, quiet roads, it was the sort of place where neighbors waved from their porches and folks left their doors unlocked. The biggest stories came from Friday night football scores or debates over whose peach cobbler reigned supreme at the county fair. But that changed. Everything changed when the ash vultures came. No one knew exactly where the motorcycle gang had come from. Some whispered Iowa. Others murmured something about South Dakota. But one thing was clear to everyone. They didn't belong here. Within 3 weeks, the ash vultures, named for the flaming skulls of vultures sewn into the backs of their leather, had taken over the abandoned body shop on the edge of town. At first, people gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just gearheads. Loud, sure, but harmless. Then the trouble began at the bar by the bus stop. They started closing early. I's window had been shattered, and 3 high school kids were caught carrying pills no one in Maple Ridge had ever seen before. The sheriff called it a problem with no solution. That was enough for people to start steering clear of the west side once the sun went down. They didn't need to raise their voices or make threats to be intimidating. Their presence was enough. The roar of loud engines, the weight of cold stares, and the quiet understanding that anyone who stepped the wrong way might not get a second chance. It was a Tuesday morning when they walked into Helen's diner. The doorbell gave its usual bright little chime, but that sound didn't land the way it used to. 5 of them came through the door, all wrapped in black leather, chains clinking softly, tattoos running like rivers up their throats and down their arms. The one at the front was tall, jaw clenched tight, a massive snake tattoo twisting from the dip of his collarbone to the edge of his jaw. They called him Rex. He didn't bother waiting for a seat. Rex dragged a chair out from the middle of the aisle and planted himself square in the walkway near the kitchen like he owned the place. His crew fanned out around him, lounging carelessly, claiming space the way only men do when they're certain no one will push back. The other customers grew silent. An elderly couple seated by the window quickly pretended they were done with their food. A young man in a crisp suit kept his eyes locked on his phone like it might protect him. The waitress, Lena, moved too fast and jostled a tray. Coffee sloshed and burned her wrist. "Hey, sweetheart," Rex said, loud and easy like they were old friends. Lena turned around, her order pad already in hand, fingers trembling slightly despite her best effort to hide it. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Her voice was flat, practiced. Rex didn't answer. Instead, he reached forward and took hold of her wrist. "How about your number for starters?" She tried to pull away. "Please let me go." "Whoa now, Rex said, his smile twisting, sharp-edged and hollow. "Why so tense? We're just being nice." His grip got tighter. No one moved. No one spoke, except for one man. From the back corner booth, tucked in the far left, a soft rustling broke the silence. Raymond Clay folded his newspaper in half. He didn't look up, didn't say a word, but his hands moved, slow, steady, until they rested flat on the table. Then came the sound, tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, barely audible. So quiet it almost didn't register. But something had begun, something ancient, something barely remembered. Raymond Clay didn't rise with a shout or bark a warning like in the movies. There was no flash of righteous fury, no dramatic speech, just a man quietly folding his paper with practiced precision, pressing each crease like it mattered. He laid it beside his coffee cup, now nearly drained, and placed both hands calmly on the table. No one noticed. Rex was still holding Lena's wrist. The rest of the gang chuckled under their breath. The old couple had already slipped out the door. The man with the phone kept scrolling, not even glancing up. The air in the diner was thick now, but it hadn't ignited. Not yet. Raymond's face didn't change, but something in his posture did. Slight, measured. Like a man reclaiming his presence, straightening his back, settling deeper into the ground. His right hand curled slowly into a fist. He tapped again. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. To most, it would have sounded like nothing more than a nervous twitch, an old man's fidget. But it wasn't. It was a code, a signal, a fragment from a world most had forgotten. A silent call passed in the dark when radios failed, and noise meant death. A relic of a time when men like Raymond Clay had no records, just call signs and classified files. Across the room, just past the swinging kitchen doors, Earl Monroe was sliding another plate of hash browns onto the service counter. He looked like any tired cook in his 60s, graying under a sweat-stained ball cap, apron smudged with grease. To the folks in Maple Ridge, he was just Earl, the man who'd manned the grill at Helen's since most people could remember. They didn't know he used to run with the 2nd Marine Recon back in the Gulf War. Didn't know he still carried a photo in his wallet. 8 young men in dusty uniforms, grinning like they knew something the rest of the world never would. Earl Monroe never hesitated until that sound. That faint, deliberate tapping sliced through the haze of sizzling grease and idle chatter like a siren meant only for him. His hand faltered, and the spatula clanged against the hot grill. For a heartbeat, time froze. Then Earl's eyes slowly lifted and locked onto Raymond, sitting at the counter. Raymond didn't look up. He didn't need to. Earl understood. That simple signal, subtle and ancient, spoke louder than words ever could. With one nod, silent and sure, Earl unfastened his apron, hooked it on the wall, and stepped out through the kitchen's rear exit without a single word. No one noticed him go. Not Rex, lounging with his gang, not the flustered waitress darting between tables, not even the businessman too lost in his phone to sense the shift in atmosphere. But something had changed, something deep beneath the surface. Because Earl wasn't stepping out for a smoke. He wasn't going to alert the police. He was going to make the call, the one no one had dared to make in more than 30 years. The protocol had been clear since day one. If the old man taps the table, we move. No questions, no hesitation. Earl didn't grab a coat, didn't stop to breathe. He just walked, calm, measured, fast, toward the battered Ford pickup tucked behind the alley. The moment the door slammed shut, his body moved with an ease and focus that had been dormant but never forgotten. He turned the ignition, yanked the wheel with practiced force, and peeled west out of Maple Ridge, past the rusting grain elevators, beyond the single-lane bridge that cut across the abandoned fields. The land grew empty around him, choked with wild grass and thyme. 10 minutes later, Earl veered off the highway onto a gravel path nearly swallowed by weeds. At the end of the trail stood a weathered red barn, its roof slouched in defeat, windows broken and rimmed with the detritus of years. But Earl wasn't looking for shelter. He was looking for the kitchen. Buried beneath that barn, beneath decades of peace. He entered through the side, his boots stirring dust from the forgotten past. At the far wall, just beside a warped feed trough, he slid aside a false panel. Wood groaned with age. Beneath it, swathed in silence, sat a steel case untouched by time. Dropping to one knee, Earl punched in a 6-digit code and cracked it open. Inside, a Cold War-era communication console wrapped in canvas and lead lining, ancient by today's standards, but reliable. Self-powered, analog, and built to last. Earl had swapped out the battery every year, always on the same date, out of habit, out of duty. Now, that duty called. The console flickered to life, its dim green glow bleeding into the shadows like a whisper from another world. Static crackled low and constant as Earl adjusted the frequency dials with the same precision he once used under fire. Then, from a hidden pouch, he retrieved a small metal transmission key, worn, etched with the insignia of a unit that officially no longer existed. He connected it with a click, tapped in the preliminary code, 7E-321, followed by worth 207. Then he paused, steadying his breath, and entered the final trigger sequence. 3, 2. The console clicked. An invisible pulse burst from the barn, undetectable to anyone else, but unmistakable to those who had been trained to feel it. In a cluttered garage in rural Michigan, an old receiver blinked. In an Ohio bait shop, a signal buzzed awake. Deep in a woodworking shed in Colorado, dust-covered equipment stirred. Systems built in shadows, wired by men who lived in the margins, lit up once more. No names, no voices. Just a line of encrypted words glowed across cracked green screens. Echo signal, Foxtrot 6. Code pattern. Table 2. Time window. Active. Within 3 minutes, 4 men paused whatever life they had built for themselves, left tools on benches, gloves on hooks, lives mid-sentence, and began preparing. There was no need for confirmation, no checking in. When the signal came, it meant one thing. One of us is in danger. And the brotherhood still held. After all these years, Shadow Echo was alive again. Back at Helen's diner, the air had thickened. Oppressive, predatory. The gang had made themselves at home. Too much so. Rex now leaned back in his chair, one scuffed boot propped up, his cracked leather jacket draped loosely from his shoulders. A large serpent tattoo slithered across his ribs, disappearing beneath the fabric. His men lounged in the booths like scavengers in a butcher shop. Meat half-eaten, drinks spilled, napkins shredded like prey. One thug had hijacked the jukebox remote, cycling through loud country tracks until he landed on something obnoxious enough to match their mood. Lena did everything she could to keep moving. Her face had gone ghostly pale. Every time she walked past Rex, his hand would graze her hip, just enough to make her recoil or brush too close along her waist, as if by accident. But it wasn't. Each time it happened, she flinched. And each time they laughed. Loud, cruel, like they'd won something. "Where's that smile, darling?" one of them called after her with mock sweetness as she moved away, voice sharp as broken glass. "Come on, we're just having breakfast." She said nothing. She couldn't. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she disappeared behind the counter again, her shoulders tight with silent humiliation. At one of the booths nearby, a father and his teenage son exchanged tense glances. The man clenched his jaw, torn between fear and fury. The boy shifted his gaze toward the door, heart pounding, silently hoping someone else, anyone else, would act. But no one did. The cook wasn't Earl anymore, not since last month. In his place stood Mikey, a nervous teen barely old enough to drive. He fumbled behind the grill, sweat gathering at his brow as he tried to remember which burner was which. One skillet smoked black with forgotten eggs. Another hissed with barely cooked bacon. But no one complained. Not to him, not today. In the far corner of the diner, Raymond Clay sat alone in his booth. He hadn't touched his coffee. It had long since gone cold. Still, he didn't lift the cup. He didn't need to. He just watched. Every so often, Raymond's eyes would rise to the clock hanging behind the counter. A plain diner model, white face, black rim, its second hand sweeping forward in soft, steady ticks. But Raymond wasn't watching the seconds. He was watching time. The kind of time you feel deep in your bones when you've been waiting for something inevitable. Every tick was a mark, a warning, a countdown. To the others, Raymond looked like a remnant of the past, a dusty old veteran forgotten in the corner. Quiet, motionless, like time had passed him by, but it hadn't. Inside him, something was moving, each heartbeat aligned with a rhythm only he could feel, one that had begun the moment he tapped his fingers lightly against the tabletop. That was the signal, and as Rex finished his third stolen plate of bacon and leaned back with a loud belch that rattled the silverware around him, Raymond didn't even flinch. He just checked the clock again. 1 hour down, 1 hour left. The gang still filled the room with their mocking arrogance. Loud voices, loud laughter, no sirens, no footsteps, no lawmen bursting through the door. Exactly the way Raymond had planned it. Because when that door finally opened, it wouldn't be the sheriff. And it wouldn't be the local cops. It would be men no one had seen in a very, very long time. And by the time anyone realized what was happening, it would already be over. That morning, the roads leading into Maple Ridge were calm, almost eerily still. A blanket of low-grade clouds hung heavy above the fields, casting a dull silver haze across acres of corn and wheat. Every so often, a rusty pickup passed by. Nothing unusual, just another sleepy Tuesday in rural Nebraska. Until the convoy arrived. 4 black SUVs crossed the county line, rolling in tight formation. Civilian-model Chevy Suburbans, heavily modified. They moved with purpose. No swerving, no wasted motion. Their headlights were off. Windows tinted jet black. No license plates, no emblems. Just the smooth, silent presence of something dangerous. People noticed. They always did, even if they didn't know why. At the old Sinclair gas station, an elderly man stood by his truck, filling it up. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just gave a slow, knowing nod, like the sight of those vehicles pulled something ancient from the back of his mind. Near the high school, a woman walking her dog paused mid-step. The dog stopped, ears perked high, body still. The rumble of those engines wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. It felt like a warning from a time before either of them were born. The convoy passed the old Presbyterian church, then the long-abandoned grain co-op, then the flickering yellow light at Main Street, which hadn't worked right in years. And finally, they turned onto Cedar Avenue, toward Helen's Diner. Inside, no one noticed. Rex and his boys were still working through their third helping of free food. They barked out orders like drill sergeants, laughing, harassing Lena every time she passed. One thug had his boots propped on the booth across from him, casually spinning a butter knife between his fingers. Another had stolen the sugar dispenser and was dumping its entire contents into his mug just to see the coffee spill over the rim. And still, Raymond Clay didn't move, didn't blink. He didn't need to. He just looked at the clock. 8:28 a.m., exactly 2 hours since the signal had been sent. Outside, the 4 SUVs glided to a halt in perfect alignment. Tires hissed quietly on pavement. Then, as if choreographed, every door opened at once. The first man stepped out. He was tall, probably in his early 60s, with steel gray hair cropped close to the scalp and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from solid concrete. He wore a weathered flannel shirt, neatly tucked into a pair of black jeans. The clothes were simple, unassuming, but his posture, straight as a rifle barrel, shoulders square, arms resting calmly at his sides, said everything. He hadn't forgotten discipline, hadn't forgotten who he used to be. 3 more men followed behind him. Each had a different build, dressed in his own way, denim, canvas jackets, military boots, but they all moved with the same deliberate precision. They weren't young anymore, but their presence carried weight, sharpened by a past not easily left behind. They walked like they belonged to another world. Ghosts from a time that didn't speak, only acted. Each of them bore a faded tattoo on their forearms, Foxtrot 6, partially concealed beneath roll-up sleeves. A mark of brotherhood, or perhaps something darker. The diner's door creaked open as they entered. The bell above jingled softly, a gentle sound that barely broke through the hum of morning conversation and clinking cutlery. But it was enough. Raymond looked up, just once, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was all. The lead man stepped forward, steady and composed, his eyes scanning the room without urgency. His voice was calm, low, and controlled, like someone who didn't need to raise it to be heard. "Where's the problem?" And just like that, the mood in the diner snapped. The laughter, the bravado, it vanished in an instant. The gang, seated cockily around their booth, suddenly looked unsure. It wasn't Raymond Clay who seemed out of place anymore. It was them. For one tense moment, everything froze. Rex, the self-appointed leader, was halfway through some loudmouth story, his boot thudding lazily against the side of the booth. One of his boys held a spoon mid-air, forgotten. The rest straightened subtly, senses sharpening without knowing why. There had been no threats, no weapons drawn, just 4 aging men standing by the entrance. But something in the air had shifted, like the stillness before a lightning strike. The lead man, Silas Boone, strode directly toward Raymond's booth. His boots tapped lightly against the tiled floor. He stopped beside the table, gave Raymond a respectful nod, and said only, "We got the ping." Raymond leaned back slowly, folding his hands across his lap like a man closing a chapter. His voice was calm, almost tired. "Don't hurt them," he said. "Just remove the problem." Behind Silas, the three others moved like parts of a machine. One slipped toward the kitchen. Another positioned himself near the hallway at the back. The last took up silent watch by the door. No theatrics, no shouting, just quiet, deliberate positioning. They didn't need to intimidate. Their presence did that all on its own. Rex blinked and stood up, confused by how quickly the balance of power had flipped. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. No answer came. He turned toward Raymond, disbelief bubbling into frustration. "What is this, old man? You call your bingo buddies to come save your ass?" Raymond didn't flinch. His eyes flicked toward the clock above the register. 8:29. "Right on time," he said. Silas moved. One step, one fluid motion. As Rex's hand jerked toward his waistband, Silas caught his wrist mid-reach and twisted it sharply. A dull metallic clatter rang out as the pistol hidden under Rex's belt hit the floor and slid under the counter. Rex grunted in pain, but before he could recover, Silas swept his leg and took him down in one swift motion. A knee pinned Rex's shoulder to the floor, heavy and unyielding. The movement was surgical, controlled, precise. No wasted energy. Two of the gang members jumped to their feet, but it was already too late. The other three men closed in like a tide. Elbows were bent back, wrists locked. Pressure applied with the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from years, decades, of hard-earned experience. There were no punches thrown, no screams, just swift, clean neutralization. One by one, the five men were taken down. Not bruised, not bloodied, just handled. Like threats being disarmed by professionals who'd done this 100 times before. Rex writhed beneath Silas's grip, panting. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice cracking. Silas looked down at him, unmoved. "No one you want to remember," he replied flatly. In less than 30 seconds it was over. Lena stood by the coffee station, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. The businessman at the far booth had lowered his phone, completely speechless. In the kitchen, the teenage dishwasher peeked around the corner, gripping his spatula like a shield, hands trembling. And Raymond Clay, he calmly picked up the folded newspaper from his booth and laid it neatly across his lap. Then he turned his gaze to the window. Outside, 4 matte black SUVs were parked, engines running quietly. Silas looked to Raymond. A beat passed between them, mutual understanding. "Extraction plan?" Raymond gave a single nod. "No cuffs, no sirens. County line drop-off. Let that be their final warning." Silas understood. No need for a response. The men began guiding the gang members out one at a time. Silent, efficient. Not a word exchanged. No need to escalate. This was already the end of the conversation. Rex was the last one escorted out. His eyes darted wildly around the diner as if trying to piece together what had just happened. How things had turned so fast. How this quiet old man had suddenly become something else entirely. And when the door finally closed behind them, silence. The door clicked shut behind them, and with that, a hush fell over the diner once more. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from fear or unease. It was the quiet that settles in after a storm has passed. Not a soul spoke. The black SUVs didn't idle or linger. Just like they'd arrived, silent, focused, and exacting, they vanished, slipping out of town in a tight 4-vehicle convoy, tires whispering against the blacktop as they glided just over the speed limit. No one gave chase. No one even thought about it. By the time their taillights disappeared over the state line, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, burning through the remnants of the morning mist like a curtain being pulled back. The gang members, once cocky and loud, waving weapons like they owned the place, had been left behind at a bus station in the neighboring county. No bruises, no blood, not a scratch on any of them. But their expressions? Hollow, shaken, eyes darting, mouth sealed shut. Each of the 5 held a manila envelope, lightweight but heavy in meaning. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No logo, no signature. Just 4 stark words typed in bold capital letters. "Do not return to Maple Ridge." Back in town, Sheriff Donnie Mercer pulled into Helen's with his lights flashing, heavy boots thudding across the floor. He braced himself for a mess. Maybe broken chairs, bodies on the floor, something dramatic. But inside, the world hadn't unraveled. The regulars sipped their morning coffee like it was just another Tuesday. The comforting scent of frying bacon hung in the air. And there, in his usual booth near the window, sat Raymond Clay, calm as ever, flipping through the Omaha World Herald as if nothing had happened. Donnie glanced around, puzzled. "I got a call about a disturbance," he announced, scanning the room for evidence of violence or chaos. Lena, standing behind the counter with the dish towel in hand, gave a casual shrug and offered a gentle smile. "No disturbance, Sheriff. Just a little misunderstanding. It's all been taken care of." "Handled?" Donnie's brow furrowed. He turned again, eyes raking over the scene. No broken windows, no blood, no suspects cuffed in the corner. "I thought I saw a whole bunch of bikes out front," he said. "They left them," Raymond murmured, eyes never leaving his paper. "Someone will pick them up later today." Donnie squinted, noting the flat, unshakable calm in Raymond's voice. There was something in the way he said it, a stillness that didn't invite more questions, a tone that sounded final. The sheriff shifted his weight, suddenly unsure of himself. "Strangest thing," he muttered. "Could have sworn," but he let the words fade. Tipping his hat politely to Lena, then giving Raymond a silent nod, he turned and walked back out. No official report was written that day. By sunrise the next morning, the motorcycles were sitting in the police impound lot, paperwork already completed and filed, each one tagged with parking violation notices. No one admitted to moving them. No one asked. A week later, something new appeared at Raymond Clay's booth. A small brass plaque fixed to the edge of the table. Plain, unmarked, screwed into the wood like it had always belonged there. "If he taps, leave." Lena noticed it first. She didn't question where it had come from or who had put it there. She just smiled faintly, and from that day forward, she made sure that table was wiped down twice every day, whether it had guests or not. Raymond never acknowledged the plaque. He never tapped the table again. Not that anyone heard, anyway. But people knew. Even the newcomers, those passing through town or settling in fresh, learned fast. That booth wasn't for sitting. And if Raymond ever so much as lifted a hand toward the wood, folks near the door would glance that way, muscles tensing just a bit, because the story had already begun to travel. Passed not through headlines or police logs, but through whispers in VFW halls, shared glances across firehouse poker tables, stories swapped between veterans over cold beers or late-night radio channels. A legend in quiet tones. Somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, there was a man who didn't call for backup, because backup was already listening. The men of Foxtrot 6 returned to their civilian lives, scattered across the country. One owned a hardware store in a small town in Ohio. Another guided fishermen through misty lakes in Michigan. One tended to trails as a retired park ranger down in Kentucky. Their phones went back in drawers. The encrypted channels fell silent. But the brotherhood? That never stopped. Some codes don't expire. Some networks never truly disconnect. And some men never stop serving their country. They just wear different uniforms now. In Maple Ridge, life slipped back into routine, on the surface at least. The ash vultures, those arrogant threats on bikes, were never seen again. Rumors drifted in that they'd moved to another state altogether. No one knew where, no one really cared. What was certain, though, was this: the drug traffic in the county dropped off almost overnight. Sheriff Donnie Mercer credited the change to a new enforcement strategy, though whenever he was asked to explain what that meant, he'd just scratch his head, glance over at Helen's Diner and shrug. Because some things aren't meant to be explained. At Helen's Diner, life returned to a steady rhythm, but something in Lena had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. She moved through each shift with a calm assurance that hadn't been there before. There was a new steadiness in her hands, a quiet peace behind her eyes. She smiled more easily. The sound of raised voices no longer made her flinch. And every morning, precisely at 6:30, she would place a steaming cup of black coffee at booth 4, always right before Raymond Clay pushed open the door and stepped inside. She never once asked him about what had happened that morning. He never volunteered the story, but her actions spoke clearly. His coffee was poured, full and hot, before he even slid into his seat. It was a silent agreement between them. No questions, no explanations, just a steady ritual that said more than words ever could. Raymond resumed his old routine as if nothing had changed. Coffee, newspaper, the occasional polite nod, or brief exchange. He still wore that worn denim jacket, still tucked the same creased newspaper beneath his arm. To strangers passing through, he may have seemed like any other old man with time to spare and no particular place to be. But those who lived in town knew better now. They'd seen the way strangers, especially the rough-looking ones, avoided Booth 4. They'd noticed how, once in a while, an unfamiliar car with out-of-state plates would park outside. A man, usually in his 50s or 60s, would enter, say nothing, shake Raymond's hand, and leave. No orders placed, no words exchanged, just a quiet, respectful handshake, and then they were gone. These men never made a scene. They came in silence and left the same awe, but always with an unmistakable air of reverence, like soldiers paying tribute to a superior. Whispers began to circulate 2 towns over, inside the VFW hall. Raymond's name was mentioned in hushed voices, especially among the older vets. Some called him the conductor. Others just nodded solemnly and said, "He still has the keys." Phrases like Echo Protocol and Table 2 drifted through the air like echoes from a past most people had forgotten, or perhaps never knew. But if you asked directly, they'd simply smile and brush it off as old war stories. Nothing worth writing down, they'd say, though their eyes told a different truth. But it wasn't really about Raymond anymore. It had grown into something larger, something he symbolized. Discipline that didn't waver, loyalty that didn't need to be shouted, an unshakable kind of quiet authority. Brotherhood forged in fire and sealed beyond the battlefield. In a world now drowning in noise, outrage, and performative rage hurled across glowing screens, Raymond Clay stood as a reminder of a very different kind of strength. A strength that didn't boast, didn't posture. A strength that didn't need to be loud to be felt. He reminded people that true power often doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly in a corner booth, drinks its coffee black, and watches. And sometimes all it takes is a single deliberate tap on the table to set something in motion that can't be undone. Raymond never sought attention, never told stories, never pinned medals to his chest or demanded a place of honor. What he did do, what he always did, was show up every morning, same seat, same quiet presence, same dignity that radiated more forcefully than any title or uniform. His story wasn't about that one morning, it was about the man himself. A man who understood that real strength doesn't age. That discipline is a lifelong habit. That certain promises made in uniform still hold, even decades after the battle's end. Men like Raymond are easy to overlook today. Quiet figures in flannel or denim, alone at corner tables, scanning rooms not out of fear, but because they've been trained to see what others miss. They don't speak unless it matters. They carry codes of conduct the rest of the world has long forgotten. And every so often, something happens to remind us they're still here, still watching, still ready, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Loyalty, brotherhood, love for those who've stood beside them, and for those too young to know the cost of peace. Foxtrot 6 isn't just a team, it's a symbol, a quiet, living network of veterans who remain vigilant, not because anyone ordered them to, but because they never stopped caring. Never stopped standing watch. So the next time you see a quiet old man nursing a cup of coffee, eyes flicking across the room with practiced precision, don't be so quick to write him off. He may not look like a hero, but if he taps that table, someone somewhere just might already be on the move. If this story stirred something in you, share it with someone who understands what quiet strength really means. Leave a comment below. Do you believe silent brotherhoods like this still watch over us? Have you ever met someone whose silence carried the weight of a story too big for words? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to keep hearing powerful stories about honor, loyalty, and the invisible heroes all around us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment. Thank you for being here.